Okay, well, people are still coming in, but we have a little intro to give, so I guess I'll get going. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is the final event of our 2022 Film and Lecture Series. My name is Jane Rumrill. I'm the Greenbelt Events Manager. For those of you who might not know us, Greenbelt is a land trust serving the 34 cities and towns of Essex County. We're a member-supported nonprofit, so we hope you'll become a member to help us continue our mission of protecting natural lands across Essex County, helping conserve healthy ecosystems, clean water, local food supplies, scenic landscapes, and free, accessible places for all to benefit from nature. Membership allows us to provide interesting and educational events like this one. So to everyone who is already a member, thank you very much. Your support means so much to us. A few quick notes about Zoom before we get started. We are recording this, so if you have to drop out early or if you want to share it with someone after the fact, we'll put that up on our webpage on the events page where you probably signed up for this event. That'll be right at the top. There are captions available tonight. If you notice at the bottom of your screen, there is a button that says live transcript. You can toggle the captions on and off there, and you can change the size of them, adjust them to whatever makes you comfortable. And also at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A button, which we'd love for you to use for any questions that you have for our speaker tonight. I'll try and also monitor the chat, but the Q&A lets me keep track of which questions have been answered. So we'd really love it if you would use that. So I would like to get us started with a land acknowledgement. The properties that Greenbelt conserves in Essex County are on the ancestral lands of the Pennacook and Pawtucket. Tonight, I'm hosting from my home in Salem, which was named Nomkeg by its original inhabitants. For thousands of years, these native inhabitants have fished, hunted, farmed, conducted ceremonies, and raised families, having lasting connections to and stewardship of these unceded lands and waterways. Many were forced to leave, but their legacy here deserves honor. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight. Our speaker is Rhonda Anderson, who is Iñupiaq-Athabascan, originally from Alaska. Her native enrollment village is Iñupiaq. Her life work is most importantly as a mother, as well as a classically trained herbalist, silversmith, and activist. She works as an educator within area schools and in the 5 colleges near her home in Massachusetts. Rhonda has sat on several Indigenous panels and roundtables to discuss how to implement the Hyde Amendment within all IHS institutions across the US, how to better educate Native students in Massachusetts on issues regarding Native teen drug use and alcohol use, land acknowledgements, land back movement, murdered and missing Indigenous women, and reproductive rights. Her activism ranges from removal of mascots to the water protector movement, Indigenous identity, and protecting her traditional homelands in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge from extractive industry. Vital, Vibrant, and Visible Indigenous Identity Through Portraiture is an ongoing collection and exhibit of portraits of Native peoples of New England, curated by Rhonda to bring awareness to contemporary Indigenous identity. Rhonda has been recognized for her work by the Massachusetts State Senate and the Massachusetts Commission on the Status of Women as a 2021 Commonwealth Heroine. Rhonda is Western Massachusetts Commissioner on Indian Affairs, co-founder and co-director of the Okateo Cultura Center and the Native Youth Empowerment Foundation. And she's a member of the Advisory Council for the New England Foundation of the Arts. Thank you so much for being here and taking time to be with us tonight, Rhonda.
Oh, thank you so much. So pagalagisi, ubalami, Iñupiaq alak, Tanakshinaga, Nagaga, Ariga Rhonda Anderson, Kaktovik Mia Goranga, Fairbanks Mia Naya Noranga, Pangmapak no Oranga, Korinami. So thank you, Koyanak Nalag Nagisi. So I said, welcome and good afternoon. Thank you for listening. I guess it's good evening now, isn't it? So thank you, Jane Rumrill, for having me. Thank you, Greenbelt, the Essex County Land Trust. Wow, I really appreciate your statement at the beginning. Thank you for having me today. I'm gonna try to screen share. This should be fun. Okay. I'm going to try to put this into a full screen. There we go. View, enter full screen. Ta-da! Everyone can see it, I hope. So as I said before, I greeted you traditionally in my Iñupiaq language, and I am Iñupiaq-Athabascan from Alaska. My native enrollment village is Kaktovik, which is way up top near the demarcation of Canada and Alaska on the Beaufort Sea. My native enrollment village is a whaling village, and we're the only village in Area 1002 of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. My Kaktovik family really depends on subsistence hunting, fishing, and whaling for food. And as you can see by the picture below, the polar bears twice a year, it seems that there's more polar bears than humans in the village of Kaktovik. A little background history for some people in the audience here is that the government did not force us to leave our villages that we've had since time immemorial. So we don't have reservations, rancherias, or reserves for enrollment. We have enrollment in our native villages. So we also belong to corporations that oversee the many ways that the government was using our land without our permission through mining, drilling, and forestry, to name a few extractive industries. So my daughter and I are both enrolled shareholders in Arctic Slope Regional Corporation and Kaktovik Iñupiaq Corporation. I like sharing these pictures. People usually ask a lot of questions about my ancestry. And so this is my Aka. She's the little one sitting in her sister's lap. That's the sister that's closest to age in her. So my Aka was the youngest of 12, with 14 years being the difference between her and her closest sibling, Nora. They grew up in a house that you might recognize here in New England, right? So a clapboard house. It was a 2-room house, but 22 people lived in this 2-room house. There's also a picture of my great-grandmother, Iñupiaq, and I don't know if you can see it on your screen, but the woman next to her is my namesake, Alak, which is her sister. In the bottom of your screen is a picture of my grandfather, Johnny Anderson. He went to a Klutna residential school. He didn't like it very much. It was government policy to take children, Indigenous children, away to residential schools. It's a very painful experience. It was basically a policy of cultural genocide, where they remove language and culture from the children. So he quit school at the age of 16, and he became a bush pilot and later one of the first native pilots for Pan Am Airlines. It was Wien Airlines at the time. So my dad and I, there's a picture of my dad and I at the very bottom of the screen. My dad and I were born in Fairbanks. He grew up there his entire life, and he lived a life that you might recognize from here. You know, lots of baseball and Boy Scouts, high school, tons of college, like way too much college. I grew up in Plainfield, Massachusetts. My mom got divorced and moved to Western Massachusetts. Well, technically she moved to New Jersey first, and that was a big mistake coming from Alaska. So she moved to Western Massachusetts, to Plainfield. And that's where I grew up as a child, and went back in the summers to Alaska to visit my dad and my grandparents and a million relatives. So this is a good time to really get this question out of the way. I get most commonly asked, what do I call you? Are you Native American? Are you Indian? And I usually like to paraphrase a story from a man who is now, he passed away a couple of years ago, 2016, I believe, who is a late great comedian and author. His name was Jim Northrup. And he said, when he was in elementary school, he was taught that he was an Indian. When he was in high school, he learned that he was Native American. In college, he found out that he was Indigenous, and it wasn't until he went back home to his native community that he realized that he's a Anishinaabe, right? So we are the only race in this country that needs to carry cards that have blood quantum. We have enrollment numbers on them, but we also have a tribal name, a designation. So if you know our tribal designation, that's who we are. We're not Indian. That name kind of stuck. You know, Columbus was a little lost. Native Americans, okay, but we were here long before the current government of America. We were here since time immemorial. And I'm Iñupiaq, which means the real person. And many other tribes also refer to themselves as real human beings, or even the place that they come from, having a land-based identity, right? So I think that that's really important, is if you don't know the tribal identity, then maybe First Nations or Indigenous, those are appropriate terms to use. So I'm speaking to you from Coleraine, which is the traditional homelands of Secwepemc and the Pecumtuck on the Pecumagone River, which is known as the Green River today. And I think I'm just about hitting that river. It's up in here, is where the Green River is. And I'm probably right around that spot. So I really kind of want to get into where I'm from and here in Massachusetts. And I first want to start by just really recognizing this land that we are all benefiting from and give gratitude for all that she has provided and continues to provide for us. We are in the Wabanaki Confederacy territory, and Wabanaki means the place where the sun is born every day, which makes the people of this area the people of the Dawnland. So tribes historically local to my home would be Secwepemc, Pecumtuck, Nipmuc, and even Mohican tribes. Secwepemc means the people who go their own way. Secwepemc are still here, and they are a state recognized tribe in southern Vermont. Today, they have quite a mouthful of a name. It's the St. Francis Secwepemc Band of Abenaki Nation of Missisquoi. And I have the 4 different bands of Abenaki that are recognized today in Vermont. And going back to this map, it also shows the Pecumtuck, which is a Mohican Pecumtuck word. It means the people of a narrow, swift river, or people of a swift, clear stream. And the Pecumtuck were absorbed into their relative tribes of the Mohican, Abenaki, and Nipmuc peoples. Nonotuck, which is a little bit further south on the map, it means the Oxbow part of the Quinnipiac River. And the same local tribes also absorbed the Nonotuck. Nipmuc means the people of the fresh water, and they are a state recognized tribe here in Massachusetts. A state acknowledged tribe with a small reservation of land that has never been ceded. Basically that means it's never been out of tribal hands. And there's about 2,000 Nipmuc citizens today. I could be mistaken, but I think that's a number that just popped in, stuck to my brain. Mohican is named after the river Mahicanatuck, which means the waters that are never still, and it's referencing the Hudson River. The Mohicans call themselves Mohikaniok, which I might not be pronouncing that right. It's not my language, so I apologize. Which means the people of the waters that are never still. It's important to understand that war, genocide, dispossession, and colonization that forced the Nonotuck and Pecumtuck to seek refuge with their neighboring kin tribes, also were the exact same reason that pushed the Mohican, Stockbridge, and Munsee bands to move west across the country in the late 17 to 1800s. The Mohican came to Wisconsin, where they have a reservation today on Menominee territory. And the Mohican tribe also has an office in Williamstown and lands in Troy, New York to maintain their local ties. So I have a picture of their seal, and this seal represents the start and the finish of their journey, the beginning of their travels and the end of their travels. Their arms are outstretched in like a form of prayer. It has two council fires, which are the circles in the middle of this design, and then two different traveling times, which represent the lines going across. At least this is how I understand their symbol today. And again, I love these maps, so I'm going to return to it because I love seeing the watershed. I am in the watershed of the Quinnipiac River or Connecticut River. Quinnipiac means long tidal river, but there's been many different names by many different groups along its flowing path. It's just Quinnipiac seems to kind of stuck. It's also known as the Connecticut River today. So just even looking at the map, I think maybe you can see how Native people identify themselves with the place where they live. And that's really who we are. We see ourselves as one with the land and not separate of the earth. So as was stated in the land acknowledgement, it's also very important to remember that Indigenous communities have lived and gathered and farmed and hunted and fished and lived and died and birthed here for thousands of years. But even more importantly, to understand that they are still here. Again, I love using these maps. These maps are from Dr. Lisa Brooks. She does an incredible job. And like, I love seeing these maps because what's missing? Like, do you see what's missing? What's missing is those colonizer lines, those boundaries, those, that crossed Indigenous people. Lisa Brooks also wrote two fabulous books on history in this area and reclaiming Native land and Native space in that way. And one of the books is called The Common Pot, which I love it. And Our Beloved Kin, also an exceptional book. That's where you can find these maps. You can find them online. You can Google Lisa Brooks, The Common Pot, or Lisa Brooks, Our Beloved Kin. So this map shows some of the major routes of wampum and fur trade from the southeast coast of the Kitsitaqua, which is the Great River, also known as the St. Lawrence River, and centering on the Quinnipiac River or the Connecticut River. And I don't know if you can see or tell, but the most common way of traveling was either through the rivers, the watershed system, or along the ocean. So I like this because it really shows how we're all connected to each other. We're really connected to each other by one of the largest watersheds in New England. And I'm sure even you out there on the eastern part of the state share some of the waters that come off of the White Mountains in New Hampshire. I would assume that divide doesn't take all the water away. Maybe it goes a little both ways. I don't know. But the Quinnipiac flows from what is now known as the Canadian border to Long Island Sound. So it makes up 11,000 miles of watershed. It's absolutely gorgeous. And some maps I've seen, it looks like a tree of life. So let's see, I really wanted to show that there's like this interconnectedness, this, pardon the pun, fluidity. And a river is constantly moving. It's always shifting. And rivers, especially larger rivers, they're considered living beings. I've come to learn that that's what the wa, Quinatakwa, the wa means it's a living being. So in that way, I wanted to tell you a little story that was an amazing adventure. And it started out as a dream. I had this dream. I'm sure you've probably had them too. They're very visceral. You know, I was on the Pecamagon River bank, the Green River, which is maybe half a mile from my house. And I was walking along the rocky shore, and I saw this stone, and it had a perfect white circle on it. And so in my dream, I picked up that rock, and as soon as I picked it up to look at it, my alarm went off. So I tried to hit snooze and tried to go back to that rock. And of course, that moment was gone. So I drive my daughter to school. And on the way home, I took the North Green River Road along the Green River. And I noticed that it was exceptionally silty green that day. So I stopped to pull over to skip some rocks, like what I was doing in my dream. And as soon as I set foot on the shore, that rock is what I found. The rock that was in my dream. Nice black rock with a white circle on the top. And so I determined right then and there that this was a sign. This was absolutely a sign. Like, I had chills. So I wanted to know the origins of this river, the actual beginning of this river, and why was it this glacial silty green that day, this glacial silty green that really speaks to me, because a lot of rivers in Alaska are this silty blue or silty green. So I got in the car and I turned on my GPS and I followed the river. Along the way, I stopped to look at a lot of the different geological features that were both created by nature and by man. And they were just side by side, just so beautiful. I also, was so taken by my experience that later in the afternoon, I packed up my family and took them on the same journey. And when we did that, we really stopped and admired and marveled at all the different features, the mill chases that were there from 200 years ago, but also the ice that was forming from the night before. So a very macro like lens on everything, looking at the big picture and the little picture. So ultimately, I was blown away by what I found. I came across an ancient, very recently exposed glacial perched lake. It was a lake bed that was formed in the glaciatic era. It was about 5 acres in size, 15,000 years old. And all of the most recent storms, we had Hurricane Irene come in 2011. We had a lot of other storms coming through that kind of started to tear away at this bank, and trees were falling in, and it was turning this gorgeous, beautiful green of all this glacial silt that was tumbling into the river. But I continued to follow the river to the headwaters. I was following my GPS, but I only have this little tiny view of where I am. And when I got to this, the source, which is a bog, I thought I was in the middle of nowhere. Of course, it's everywhere to a lot of different beings, but I was at the foot of Hogback Mountain in Marlborough, Vermont. And I realized that because in the little mountain that's at the head of headwaters, I saw trucks going up the hill. I was like, oh, now I know where I am. So I was so surprised, but I was also so elated. And I mean, really, how could I have lived along this river for, oh gosh, how long have I lived here? I've lived here for almost 20 years. How long could I have lived along this river and not known its origins? But now, when I pitch a tent, I have a spot on the Green River, and that rocky shoal changes every year. It's different in the spring, but I pitch a tent right there. And when I hear the river, now I can hear the story of the places that it's traveled, from springs to bogs and over those waterfalls and meandering through those meadows and carving ancient glacial lakes, that lifting that silt from 10,000 years ago, and it's sort of set free. It's been acknowledged. And now I have this better understanding and connection to this river. You know, what is your watershed address? You put that in the chat. What's your watershed address? Get to know your watershed, right? Get to know the challenges that your watershed faces. In my town, we have mills, and one of the oldest mills actually, had a sulfuric acid leak in 2019. It killed 100,000 fish in a very small section of land. So I organized a prayer and an awareness rally with other river advocates and allies. And we helped the school raise trout in the classroom, which then the children released into the river. And they learned so much about the beloved river. They were mortified seeing all of these fish belly up in their river. And they asked their teachers what they could do. Elementary school children. Absolutely beautiful. So I have also been participating in reciprocity with my watershed, giving back to my watershed, gosh, for 30 years now. Over 10 years ago, I was a Girl Scout leader, which is kind of funny. I got kicked out of Girl Scouts when I was a brownie because I ate the birdseed feeders. Anyway, I was a very good leader, and I had the troops study how to save water and learn how to be involved in their watershed. They learned what lived in the river by the school, which was the North River, and they stocked salmon fry. And in the spring, I really enjoy what I call foraging for a meal. So fishing for trout, finding fiddleheads and ramps each spring. And these delicious foods that are found in our beautiful and bountiful watershed is really sort of participating in a reciprocal relationship. And how I participated in a reciprocal relationship was not only teaching children about the watershed, but the ramps. I take the ramps, and if they were in areas that were soon to be disturbed by building lots, I transplanted them to other areas so they would continue to thrive and grow. Ramps are very fragile. It takes 10 years for them to develop seeds. So when harvesting them, just take one leaf off of each plant and let it be. Anyway, I feel like it's very important to get children involved in watersheds. That is really how you give back and how you participate in reciprocity that ensures the health of watersheds for the next 7 generations. Oh, right, I have to have this picture. This was me last weekend catching rainbow trout. I got one each day, and that was my dinner. I've also been honored to be part of bringing back the 7th generation to this place so that they once again can paddle in these waters. So these are pictures starting off on the left side of your screen. There's pictures of a Nipmuc elder, and she's teaching youth how to fish on the Green River, the Pecamagon River. And there's a picture of my friend and co-worker, Larry Sputter Croman, in Pesquiamscut at the Rock Dam. He is a direct descendant of that sacred fishing place. And it was a site of a massacre in May 6th of 1676. And so he's offering tobacco to that space. And my cat and my dog are playing right now. So if you hear screeching, that's what that is. We also organized, I was part of a paddle that was organized by Gadakana, and we paddled down the Quinnipiac River. Hey, can I leave it? Sorry about that. For the first time in centuries, it was a very powerful day. There was, we stopped to look at eagles, and we fished, and we sang songs. It was absolutely gorgeous. Also, I'm honored to be a part of what is now an annual Abenaki Fishing Day at the Rock Dam at Pesquiamscut. This is a picture from last year in June. There was Nipmuc, Mashpee Wampanoag, Mohawk, Penobscot, and of course, Iñupiaq, my daughter and I. And this sort of kind of reclamation of space was so joyous. To be feeling this joy in practicing subsistence fishing, and the wonder in seeing children explore and hearing their laughter, listening to songs, telling stories, all of this is powerful. And it's a beautiful place to be, a place of connection. This is the Quinnipiac watershed. The Quinnipiac watershed has also been the site of incredible machine launches near Pesquiamscut for the past 2 years. There's a picture of some Quina Wampanoag, a machine, a dugout they burned out in 19. Was a picture last year. They have launched since. And that's a picture of me leading off the procession to go meet the machine on the Quinnipiac River. And through Okateo Cultural Center, we hosted a historic machine burn that was led by our artist in residence, Andre Strong Bearheart Gaines, and his family. It was historic because this event was likely the first machine that was burned out by Nipmuc Nation in our area since colonization really took hold. And after an exhausting 10 nights and days, 24/7 burning, we launched the machine in Ashfield Lake this past November. It was kind of chilly this day. It doesn't look chilly, it looks warm, in a private ceremony, because when you put the machine in the water, it becomes alive. So it needed to be a private event. Not a public event, but we do plan to create a public launch later this year and have a talk on the history of the machine and the different machines that are still being discovered in different rivers and lakes in this area. And I really want to go back to spending time on the water, because that does more than you realize to one's body, soul, and energy, right? This connection between all life and water is intertwined. all living beings need water. We lived in water for 9 months in utero, right? Water has been here since time immemorial. So understanding this and having empathy for the water and the interconnectedness of each living being. Understanding the water as a living being. That is a process that is called neurodecolonization. Dr. Michael Yellowbird talks about decolonizing the brain. It's essentially rewiring the brain. And he talks about the disorders. They're actual disorders from colonization. And you might chuckle at this, but it's peer-reviewed, published, journaled. Some of the disorders of colonization include American exceptionalism, not listening to others, this lack of empathy, if you will. White supremacy, colonization, and racism are brain disorders. So where am I going with this? The 3 M's of colonization that was in the last slide is decolonizing the mass, which is focusing on Indigenous land and resource rights, reparations, which is like land back, tenure, stewardship, free, prior, and informed consent. It's also, having land access, which is very important. Having that access to do traditional pursuits such as subsistence, gathering medicines, having ceremonies. Then there's the mind, which is what I was talking about, neurodecolonization, decolonizing the mind from Western society beliefs and philosophies and theories. And then there's the metropole, which is decolonizing the dominant force and basically the country, the structure of colonization. So to achieve this form of neurodecolonization, you need to enter a state of mindfulness. And as this slide says, it's detoxifying the colonial garbage from the mind and the brain, engaging in a mindful practice to begin training the mind and changing the brain. And it actually will show how, when studies have been done, how the brain just lights up in red. The brain becomes engaged in key areas that form rational empathy. So there is real science behind neurodecolonization of the brain, and it's showing real lasting changes in a very short period of time, 45 minutes a day, even 30 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, anything can change the brain structures associated with memory, sense of self, empathy, and even reduce stress. So hurrah, that's a good reason to do this. So what I do, and I'm lucky and I'm privileged, I go for long walks every day on my road, and I observe those changes in nature. I observe where the sun is, where the leaves are changing, where they're coming out. Did you know that the leaves are brilliantly colored right now? They're buds. So what you see in the fall is what you see in the spring, because the chlorophyll isn't there yet. So it's absolutely gorgeous, stunning. I go deep into the woods and I notice the sun setting. Yes, I walked home in the dark this day. So noticing where, when, what are these changes? What do I hear? Some people think, oh, you live in the middle of nowhere. And I think it's everywhere to a lot of people, a lot of beings, a lot of things you don't see, it's everywhere. So what do I hear? What do I see? I love the winter because I can see how busy my area is. I'm not alone. There's a lot going on. But I love noticing these changes over time, right? I love this picture, the short-term changes and the long-term ones. This picture, I chose this to show this one again because where's that barn? There's a wall on the inside of foundation. That barn was there 200 years ago. Where's that barn? Those maple trees, how old are they? The ferns, the sun is setting in this picture. Everything is changing and noticing that beauty. Also, I'm not really one to get up and greet the sun, but when I do, it's beautiful. This is an unfiltered picture from just a few months ago. So if you can get up, greet the sun, because you are in Wabanaki land, people of the Dawn land. There is beauty in this practice. This practice of mindfulness. It really recenters the brain to accept otherness and empathy, and retrain the brain to accept other realities through nature and ceremony. Some people get up, Indigenous people get up every day and they pray to the sun. If you want to do a mindful practice of giving thanks every day to this land for what she's given you, that's beautiful. Take a beautiful pic every day. Take a picture of where you are. Even if it's just a dandelion in the cracks of a sidewalk, that's beautiful. That's resiliency. That's medicine growing in adversity. So seeing that, even if it's something that small, acknowledge it. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. Understanding that this area is rich with many, many histories, stories of generations past and generations still to come. These Indigenous stories, they started 15,000 years ago around here, maybe more. And they're still being lived out and told today. And sometimes you just have to go out and find out more. Talk to the Indigenous people of your area. Listen to them, tell their stories, find out more about where you're living. So find out more about the land that you're on. What can you do to advocate for your land, your water? How can you allow access through traditional people to come, through Indigenous people to come and practice their traditional environmental knowledge, to practice their traditional subsistence, gathering their traditional medicines, ceremonies? What can you do to help in that way? How can you give voice to the voiceless, giving voice to the water and the land and the animals? They need your voice. They need us to protect them too. So I don't know. I guess that's all I have for you. So Koyanak, thank you so much. Koyanak nagesi. Thank you for listening to me just ramble on about all my stories. And I'm sure I have lots of questions, which I'm grateful for. So I'll stop my sharing. Yay!
Thank you so much, Rhonda. That was fascinating. I was having trouble keeping up with questions and taking the notes that I wanted to take too. So thank you. One that I think we can answer really quickly, just to repeat the name of the person who did the research on the 3 M's.
Oh, Dr. Michael Yellowbird.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. So quite a few questions about water, which is wonderful. Let's see here. So one person mentioned that you're lucky to find the headwaters of your watershed so pristine. And they mentioned that where they are from, the headwaters of the Blackstone River is primarily the city of Worcester, which contributes pollution to the river all the way downstream to Narragansett Bay. So it was beautiful to see your pictures and really inspiring to know that
Yeah,
they're.
the Pecamagon River is considered a Class A river in Massachusetts and probably New England. So it's very clean. It does have some sources of pollution, but they're being mitigated pretty well. And it is drinking water for the town of Greenfield. So we're really lucky. Yes. And my husband has very often been to the headwaters of the Quinnipiac River, which he says you can just jump across.
Oh, wow.
So that's my goal. I'll do that next.
That's great. It's so fascinating to follow back these rivers, especially around here where we see the widest part where they just go into the ocean. And it seems like that's, the whole river must be like that. But like the Ipswich River's headwaters are in Burlington, which we think of as shopping malls mostly. So that was a really fascinating exploration. I hope that everybody is going to go follow their rivers now. I noticed that you mentioned the suffix, I'm going to say it badly, but way, and how that means that something is living. And I was wondering if there's also a connectedness, not just, between people and their places, but also between language in these places. I know you mentioned like the names of tribes have to do with that, but is the language more generally connected with locales and natural features?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I can't speak to the language here. It's not my language. It's not my culture. There's, lots of different Native people in the United States. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 570 federally recognized tribes, and just as many, if not more, state acknowledged tribes, and those that are seeking to have some sort of acknowledgement or recognition. What I do know is like Iñupiaq, the real person, but Nuna is land, and Nunamiut means people of the land. So I would say I am Colerainamiut, which means I'm a person of Coleraine. So in a way, yes, our languages do allow to have a designation, like we become from the place that we are currently living. It's like that's how I kind of understand it. Like we are of the land. We're not separate from the land. And when from what I understand, you can see in the Living Presence series on my website, Okoteo Cultural Center. The very first Living Presence, I had a panel with Dr. Lisa Brooks, and she very clearly said, and I'm probably going to really mince this up badly, but that it's very challenging in New England and confusing for non-Native people, because if you are, like, say, born in Waranoko and go to Scatacokie and then marry into the Missisquoi tribe, each place you go to, that's where you are. So you are Pecumtuck Waranoko, you move to Scatacokie, you become Scatacokie, you marry into, it's a matriarchal communities we have, most tribal nations are. So you marry into a Missisquoi individual, you become Missisquoi. So you belong to that land that you're on. Does that answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And sort of related to that, Russ asks, he believes he heard you say Indigenous people identify with the places where they live. If so, this may be a different location from where that person was originally from. So is it right to interpret that message of the importance of connecting to the place and plants and animals of where you are now, even if you weren't originally from there? And is that something that even non-Indigenous people should use as advice to follow?
So yes and no. So I saw a question pop up and I read it really quickly. And there is a sense of fluidity because I'm from this Turtle Island. I'm from this continent. I feel connected here. I also went to Aberdeen, Scotland, and dang, I have a little, English, Irish, Scottish, apparently. And that was pretty amazing. But I digress. The way that we identify now, after colonization happened, is we need to be enrolled members of our community, and it's matriarchal. So that's why I'm enrolled in Kaktovik. Even though I never lived in Kaktovik, I have a lot of relatives there. I was born in Fairbanks, but that's where I'm from. And that's where I'm enrolled. The government requires us as Indigenous people to be enrolled. It's their way of, I don't know, they have a relationship, sovereign nation to sovereign nation relationship with our federally recognized nations. And they have certain responsibilities to Indigenous people, obviously, since, making sure that we have adequate healthcare, education, that are, we do have some certain needs that are met that were taken from us when our land was taken. So that, I don't know if I'm confusing the issue anymore, but there is a certain responsibility that I see as an Indigenous person coming here. I hesitate to use the word guest because when non-Native people use that term, I'm a guest here. No, you're not, because you're not going home. You've trashed the house, you've taken everything out of it, and you've pushed me into the bathroom. Like, what guest does that? It's not your history, but it's your responsibility. So I hesitate to use the word guest because I don't want it to be used out of context, but I am a guest here. And it's my responsibility to have a relationship with the Indigenous people here and the land here because it's a living being. And so my favorite time to go out is in fall through spring and walk the land and get to know the plants that are here, the animals that are here, get to know the stones, the trees, everything. Get to know how the sun sets on this land, where the water comes, where the springs are. And you see a life that you wouldn't normally see, but that's my responsibility. That's how, being a Western Massachusetts Commissioner on Indian Affairs, I have to know these things. I have to know who the people are, what territories I need to be talking, what nation I need to talk to when certain things show up in certain territories. So I don't know, did I answer that question? I always feel so silly afterwards. Like, did I answer that? Or did I just go off like on a totally different topic?
No, I think that was a great answer because it is absolutely complicated. It's hard to give just a, oh, yes, or no kind of answer. Yeah.
Very complicated.
No, that was great. Thank you. And jumping off from the last thing that you said just now, one of our attendees asks, what is a polite way to introduce myself to the local Nipmuc elders in my area?
Oh, hello. Yeah, I mean, we're all human beings, right? So I don't know, just saying who you are and where you're living and ask, what can I do? I know right now the Nipmuc is trying to procure some land, and they want to start what they call an agrohood, which is for everybody. And it's basically rematriating the land so that there's sovereignty with food, their sustainability. So traditional methods for planting and harvesting medicines and food will become the norm, and you know, basically using agriculture as a source of commodity, you know, barter and making money and surviving in our world. So I think it's an amazing adventure that they're looking to do. I think it should be happening all over the place, honestly.
That sounds like a really cool project. I'm gonna have to look into that. You just mentioned, and you talked earlier about foraging and fishing, and you just mentioned access and that sort of thing. And I was wondering, what kinds of challenges do you run into as far as access for gathering medicine and foraging and finding food and that sort of thing? And what are some ways that maybe folks here can help, or some solutions that you could recommend?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. I'm again living in Western Massachusetts. You know, all the time I talk to people and I say I'm from Massachusetts, they immediately think Boston. Like, this is so far from Boston. It is not even close. So it's very rural here in Western Massachusetts, and I have been bringing out a lot of my Indigenous friends and family and allowing access because of being dispossessed from land. They haven't had the ability to access the land, again, for food, subsistence, for cultural needs, for medicines. And it gets worse the further east you go. So if you have land, if you have something that you can offer to a local tribe, you know, come and bring your native youth and, you know, walk my land. There might be something that could be an agreement. You know, you can come in the spring and forage for ramps, or I don't know what you might have to offer, but it's actually kind of easy. We at Okateo, we have a landmark agreement with Double Edge Theater. That was a crazy story. Double Edge is a theater company in Ashfield, Massachusetts, and they were doing a town-wide spectacle that they do every year. So they have different stations of performances going all the way up the main street down to the center of town, which is like a lake. And they have flying people zip cording, and I mean, it's huge. But one thing that they realized they didn't have was the Indigenous story. So they went to their local historian and asked, what's the Indigenous story here? And the historian said, there were never Indigenous people here. There are no Indigenous people here. End of story. And they couldn't believe that. So they went to hear my friend Larry Spotted Crow Man speak at UMass about being a water protector as a Iñupiaq, freshwater people. And I was there because I had just come back from Standing Rock. And I happened to sit right next to Carlos Uriona from Double Edge Theater. And we got to talking, and you know, he asked, and I said, oh, yeah, you need to meet, you know, Bonnie Hartley. She's Mohican, and you need to speak to, you know, Cheryl Tony Holly. She's Nipmuc chief. So I kind of like, you know, got them oriented, and they said, you know, we had such a hard time finding this story. And it's so obvious among the Native people, Native community, but not in the historical community, which it should be. So we were thinking, we're renovating this barn, and we were thinking maybe of having a library here. And I was like, no, no, you need to have relationships with Indigenous people, not read about us. So why don't we have a center, like a space where Native people can just be without having the confines of an educational institution like the Five College area, or a reservation where you might not feel welcome to either either space, maybe this is the way to go. And since it's in a rural area, I grew up here, it's beautiful. Why aren't there more Native people out here? So they said, yeah, let's do that. And so that's how Ocotillo Cultural Center started. Is the first founded and Indigenous run cultural center in all of central and western Massachusetts. And that need, that gap that we filled was colossal. That need for representation, that need for education, that need for Indigenous people to be safe, really, to speak how, to our issues freely, and to have access. So Double Edge Theater has over 100 acres of land, and we entered a very historic kind of land back agreement, where we are the land stewards of, so we talked to them about how to maintain the forest. And they had, for the first time, Nipmuc people boiling sap for the first time in, I don't know, hundreds of years. Yes, this is Smokey. She knows when I start talking to the screen, this is when she comes and sits on my shoulder. So, and having space to burn a machoon, having space where we're going to be building an arbor and a longhouse, or a wetu, or both, so that we can have a more outdoor space for our gatherings. These are really important aspects that can be pretty, easily negotiated between parties, and the benefits are enormous. We now have 3.5, 3.5, 3.5, people that are now living in Ashfield at Ocotillo, from 0 Native people. So we're getting there. We're slowly getting there. I'm moving Indigenous people back one person at a time, or maybe half a people at a time.
That's amazing. And just from a connection, just from someone digging a little deeper and looking for the right person to talk to. That's incredible.
Asking questions. What can we do? And this is what we've done. It's beyond my wildest dreams. It's my lifelong dream realized.
That's incredible. Sorry, my cat.
Oh, I hear your cat too.
Yes. I was trying to keep her quiet. So along those lines, you mentioned again the canoe that you made for that incredible ceremony, Michoon. We have someone watching who is watching with their 7-year-old daughter, and she is curious about the Michoon ceremony and what it means that it becomes alive, and a little more about why the ceremony is private.
Okay, again, it's not my culture, so I can't really speak to a whole lot about the ceremony of that. But the tree was once alive, and fire is considered a living being, and water is considered a living being. And so when you take this craft and you take sometimes it's oak or white pine, but you take a huge log. This one was, I forget how many feet. It was small at like 16 feet, I think. Apparently there's one that was 32 feet, I think, that was burnt. Leah and Jonathan Perry did that one at the Mashantucket Pequot Museum. It was huge. So it's cut on the top kind of flat, and then you put fire on it and you burn it constantly, and then you scrape it out. So that's why it's called dugout, because you dig it out, you dig out the coals, and it's burnt and it's constantly until it's finished. You can't stop. And when you put it in the water, it's considered to come alive. It will protect you, and I don't know, it's sort of honoring the life of the tree and the life of the fire and the life of the water. I think that's probably the best way that I can explain it. again, it's not my culture. So
Thank you. Yeah, that was really fascinating.
yeah,
To know a little bit about that.
My culture doesn't have trees. So
let's see. Oh gosh, lots of questions coming in. So I'm going to try and put any together that I can so we can get to as many as possible. This goes along with what you were saying about the Okateo Cultural Center. This person says, I'm very interested in learning Indigenous ways of living, but I have no local Indigenous heritage myself. Is it appropriate to engage with local tribes to learn these ways? I don't want to impose when I'm not part of the existing community.
oh yeah, that's hard. I think go to Okateo website and start watching the Living Presence series. We've done 6 of them so far. I curate and moderate the panels, and each one is a snapshot of Indigenous issues in the contemporary life today, things that we're dealing with right now, and start by educating in that way. Reading books is a really great way to start learning a lot more. So I also have a resource page on the Okateo website. Start using the resources, because I think it's important to also understand that it's not up to Indigenous people to always be educating about our culture. It can be very time consuming, and oftentimes we're sort of like hit up to do this for free. Like, I don't know how many times I went to my daughter's school. I'm not going to say no, it's my daughter's school, but like, we are constantly educating, and it can be very hard. It's a heavy burden. So doing as much as you can with things that are already done is probably the best way. So yeah, I do have a really big resource list on the Okateo. I started a resource list because of all the going to schools, with my friend, Dr. Jess Dolan. And then she finished it with Karuna and a lot of other educators in the area. So that's a really big resource list, and it's very thorough. It's got movies, it's got kids' books. It's good.
It is great. Along those lines, someone mentioned that they listened to the audiobook of Braiding Sweetgrass.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it's also a paper book, but I also want to put a plug in for the audiobook because it's read by the author and she reads it really beautifully and pronounces all of the words. And there's a big section about relearning her own language, which had been sort of lost to her. So it's really lovely as an audiobook.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. And it also teaches you about the reciprocity that we need to regain that relationship with our living world. Because what's happening right now, our climate crisis, is because we've lost that reciprocity. We've lost that relationship, that understanding of where we are in the living world. Yeah, we need to really get back and understand that we're a part of this environment. We aren't separate from it. So
yeah, wonderful. I'm looking forward to reading the books you mentioned too, The Common Pot and Our Beloved Chin. So taking notes. So this person is from Northampton, so in your area, and she's asking, how could towns and cities in Massachusetts share or purpose their conservation lands with Indigenous people, such as one she's thinking of at the entrance to a large acreage of conservation land in Northampton, where the city wants to build a dog kennel.
So we are working with legislators right now. So there is state land or federal land even, that state acknowledged tribes and federally recognized tribes will be first in line to be able to enter agreements for a land back kind of situation. It's pretty common all across the United States, but Massachusetts is sadly a little behind there. So we just need to have some legislation to really tighten up those laws here. Yeah. So I guess one of the best ways to do that is like, you could contact me. I could slide into that role as a Western Massachusetts commissioner, because this is in Northampton. And then I can connect you to the folks that are doing the land back work and the remediation work within the Nipmuc tribe.
Awesome. Thank you. Connection made. Yay. Let's see here. A question specifically about plants from actually someone who is a plant and edible plant expert. So he says, Russ says, I'm wondering if Rhonda is encountering any difficulty finding plant medicines, especially wild plants that she uses in her herbalism practice.
No, I'm really lucky. I'm really lucky where I live. I find almost everything. And, even recently, I had been looking for like 20 years, I'd been looking for ramps. And my husband and I have only found them in about 2 general locations, meaning pretty good size areas, but only 2 areas. So ramps are really threatened. And so I really want to put that caution out there. I have a picture. I do harvest them. I harvest them carefully. I also replant when I find that they're being threatened. But yeah, it is something out here. There it's a little easier to find medicines. I don't find chaga all that often, but I have found enough. So I have quite a stash brewing here of chaga. But yeah, and I also kind of nose to the ground quite often. I'm one of those people that I rubberneck. I look everywhere when I'm walking, and I have found some pretty incredible plants that, within the last few years, really, like rabbit tobacco, fringe gentian, bottle gentian, some plants that I just haven't ever really seen before, that are in my area, and they're beautiful. So really get out there, look around, see what you can do. Usnea, that was another one that I think I found.
Ooh. That's great. Yeah, I know that ramps are really popular in restaurants in Boston right now. So I have heard that it's become an issue, that they're being a little over harvested. Yeah. So
ramps and fiddleheads. So I've noticed, like there's on our property, we have a fiddlehead bed, and if it got over harvested, then they just got smaller and smaller. So I left it alone for like 10 years now. I haven't taken anything from it, and it's starting to come back. So, even when you think you're being really super careful, you can tip that balance. So be really mindful. And fiddleheads, I think that's like gonna be like near the way of ramps if you're not careful, but they tend to populate pretty quickly. And I've made beds and I've transplanted them, and they take over really fast. So they can rebound quickly.
That's good news. Someone asks if there is a Eastern Massachusetts version of you. Sorry, I don't know how to phrase that. Is there Eastern Massachusetts commissioner, and who is it?
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah, go to oh gosh, it's a mass.gov website, Massachusetts Commission on Indian Affairs, and you'll see all of us there. most of the commissioners are, out in your area. So
perfect. I think we have a couple more coming in, but I really want to mention this real quick, is that someone, when you were showing the photo of Hogback Mountain, said that she met her parents met there. So I just thought that was a lovely connection.
That's so sweet. Yeah, I thought I was in the middle of nowhere, and my phone rang, and it scared the bejesus out of me. I was like, oh no, I must be somewhere. But yeah, no, it wasn't until I saw that truck going up the hill, I realized, like, oh, that's where I am. That was pretty amazing. And if anybody's been to Hogback Mountain, it is really up there. It is high mountain. So
That's great. All right, there are a couple things in the chat. Some folks shared some links for everybody, but I think that rounds up the questions for tonight. So thank you so much for sharing your stories tonight, sharing all of that information and some things that everybody can do in the future. So we really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Nalang Nagisi. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Kuyana.